Hi there, welcome to another Lemon Amiga play guide and review. This time we're checking out Defender of the Crown, developed by Master Design Software and also Sculptured Software, and published by Cinemaware in America in 1986. At the beginning of the game we'll get some music and also the cast of characters as well. It's the year 1149 according to that, and it's talking about Richard returning back from the Holy Land and knighting a lot of people. At the start of the game we get to choose who we want to play of 4 characters: Wilfred, Cedric, Geoffrey or Wulfric, and you can see various stats associated with those. Also introduce us to Robin of Locksley as well, Robin of Sherwood, who will help us in our quest as we play through the game. As long as we visit his neighbourhood, he will give us some more troops and some more help when we raid those castles. It's now October 1149. We start off with a treasury of 9 according to that, and in some versions we start off with 11. It gives us some options of what we need to do, and the very first option I definitely recommend is to read the map, because that will tell you how much gold it's worth to move into that region. You can see we start off in Powys, and we can check out Gwynedd and Leicester, and we can also check out the enemy as well, Wilfred of Ivanhoe, and we can see what kind of strengths and weaknesses that they have got. We can also go raiding as well and seek conquest, and going raiding at this point of the game would be a complete waste of time given that the enemies don't have much income to spare, and so let's see how much we end up with at the end of all this. It will give us then a picture of the place that we're going to raid, and it will also give us 2 mini games. One of those is the first sword fight section, where every contact with the enemy apparently depletes their soldiers guarding the fort, and if you aim on contact, hopefully without getting hit, then you can wade through those and it will eventually fall over. In the second part of the tournament we will face another guy on a set of steps, and it's easier if you let the guy walk to the bottom of the steps, or if you chase him all the way to the top of them, and then you can attack the guy head on, because if he has the upper advantage it's sometimes possible for the enemy to win. And as long as we keep clicking on that mouse button, eventually he'll hopefully fall over, and that means that we get access to the inner sanctum and the enemy's gold, which we can then gather and return back to our home castle. At the end of all that you can see that the enemies can get lots of land, and that means that they'll get some more income. We've got 15 income at the moment, our local income is 3, so that means the difference was made up by that castle that we raided. And now that we've got 15 gold, we can collect that gold and buy some soldiers which we can amass in our home army. So just like Kingdoms of England, we'll start off with a home base, and then from there we'll have to kick them out, and kicking them out means we can build a campaign army. And at this stage it's not important to go for knights, but definitely soldiers is important, and then you can send those forth into whatever region is going to be the most profitable. And the enemies in this game, I think the light red enemy is the strongest one, followed by the deep red enemy. So the early part of the game it's a good idea to take those out as quickly as possible, and hopefully to take over some enemy territory so that we can afford to buy the catapults. And so let's raid again. We've found that sometimes if the enemies can get lots of land, then they'll get lots of money, and sometimes raiding, particularly later in the game, will give us the funds that we need to build our army. and I think we spent the last lot on our starting army, so let's see how much we can get from this, having conquered simply one land. And you can see hitting the enemy on a sweet spot makes them cave in, or maybe that depends on the leadership of the guy who's ruling the castle, because if they have strong leadership that will make the enemies harder to beat, and if they have weak swordplay and weak leadership that means they are easy to beat. So now that we've got the enemy's gold, we can now return back to our home castle, and it's definitely important to raid early on the territories. And look at that, we've been ambushed, and all that money that we collected has now been lost, and half of the income this month. That means our income is now 5 and we only get 13. So definitely raiding in the early part of the game isn't really recommended, because, well, if it's stolen away from us just like this, then it means we're going to have a harder time for the rest of the game. And in desperation I'm now raiding another castle, trying to get the money that I lost with the former raid. And if you select Geoffrey Longsword, which I have at the moment, he is the best swordsman, so he should be able to get through these enemies pretty easily. And it really does depend on the character that you choose at the start as to whether the raiding is definitely going to be something that you want to do. And hopefully you've looked at the stats at the very start, and it looks like the very easiest one to choose is Cedric of Rotherwood, and he has good leadership, or has the best leadership and good sword play. And then the second best guy to choose is Geoffrey Longsword, who is a made up character. He has the best sword play and quite good leadership as well. Definitely of the characters to choose, I'd avoid Wilfred of Ivanhoe because he's average in all of the areas, and Wulfric of Wulfric the Wild is pretty weak on all fronts except for jousting. So unless you are a master of jousting, I definitely wouldn't go for him, although there is a trick where you can get lots and lots of land, and every time you win a joust your leadership will go up, so it's possible to get strong leadership using Wulfric if you are any good with the jousting. We've made it once again to the inner sanctum of the enemy's base, and from here it's a nice journey back, carting all that gold back, hoping that we've got at least 30 gold, and then we can start a huge campaign army. You can see we're definitely behind when it comes to capturing territories, and we now have 31 gold, which should mean now we can build a demolishing force and get on with the prospect of capturing the rest of Britain. So what I like to do is return home, and then we can build up our army. And look, we've already got 14 soldiers in there. So I think every 15 soldiers you're better to buy a knight. That means if we have 30 soldiers you can probably put 2 knights in there as well, and that's a very good starting army at the beginning of the game. All I'm actually doing is piling everything up into my campaign army in the hope that we don't get raided, and sometimes that can happen in this game, and sometimes you can be taken over. So you can see Cedric's army is already in that region, which means we'll have to fight him, and ferocious attack is really only important if you've got knights. Otherwise, your soldiers, ferocious attack, it's not going to really do much to them, but it just means that you can get through the enemy quicker. And look at that, the enemy falling over each other to take over those realms, and it won't be very long before the enemies start dropping out. You can see the brown enemy has already dropped out, so that means that we're down now to 5 enemies. So as we march on through this year, and I'm not sure whether we get a time limit on this, but you'll have to get on through onto the offensive pretty early, otherwise you'll be swamped and I'm not sure if it's possible to leave a garrison behind in any of these territories so that we don't get counter-attacked. It would be a good idea if we could do that, but I'm not sure if that's possible. And look at that, the enemy doesn't have much at this point, so we really are as good as the enemy at this point, so it's a good idea, hopefully now that we've got the treasure, to buy ourselves some catapults and take down our first castle, which should hopefully be the one in the north. So you can see, yes, we own this, and it's kind of Powys Clwyd region, and so let's build up our armies again, and hopefully we can get a few catapults together to take down the base. And the catapults cost 15 gold each, which it looks like I've sailed straight past it at the moment, which isn't very nice. And so we should have really put those catapults together and took down the enemy. And definitely in this case, if you attack the enemy head on and knock them out, then that means that we gain all of the territories that they've captured so far, which means we don't have to conquer all of Northumbria. We can simply take over their castle and get that land for free. So hence it's a good idea to ignore the soldiers and make sure you've got at least 2 catapults, and then you can go and start knocking down those castles. Otherwise, if you're going to do like me, following my own esteem and going south and trying to knock out the Dunmoria castle, that will mean that the enemies will come up behind us and take over the territories that we've already taken over, and that's not very good when you can only have one campaign army. We're now in the summer, and you can see some tremendous graphics drawn by Jim Sachs, and this game was created in America, and Sculptured Software and Master Design Software, they came up with this idea and they hired Jim Sachs to create these animated, with colour cycles, animated pictures. And you can see the lamp on the back wall is colour cycling, and there should be some colour cycling effects going on, and occasionally you'll even see a shooting star appear if you hang around on this screen long enough, and that's an Easter egg which some players have noticed playing this game. Jim Sachs, the master of artwork. You can even see a drop shadow effect on the wall as well, which will mirror all our movements, and that's simply a bit plane on the back wall which is over there, and that's a very great effect, and it means that we can get some great effects going on, and it will even block out the column in the middle of the screen. You can see some tremendous light and shade effects on this particular picture, which was drawn pixel by pixel, literally over months, by Jim Sachs. Sometimes we have to run away from a massive campaign army, and if the army has 131 knights at this early stage, it just means that they've basically won the rest of the game, and there isn't much that we can do about that except to restart it from scratch. Because the enemy wants to get too strong by raiding another strong territory, then it means that they're now too strong for us to take down. And again, I'm buying knights here, pathetically trying to stay alive, and the enemy is enclosing us on all of those sides. Well, we really should have 2 catapults by this stage. Another part of the game is capturing fair maidens from castles, and at certain points you will notice messages appearing that if you raid a certain castle, a fair maiden, a damsel, is in distress, and what we need to do is to get ourselves over there, and having gone through the same 2 minigames again, we'll then rescue her, and her picture at random, wherever she is, whatever she is, of 4 different characters will appear next to our face on the map. Part of the immaculate animation and amazing pictures in this game also include the sequence where we get the maiden, and if you freeze frame that on certain frames you'll notice that you can see straight through the maiden's clothing with the backlit effect as they embrace at the end, which is another Easter egg, and it's on a single frame, so if you can pause it on that frame you get to see what she looks like. And in the meantime we get lots of other animations which are special. We only get those as soon as we rescue a maiden. We have now rescued Rebecca, and if you're wondering where these names came from, well, they came from the Wilfred of Ivanhoe book, which was actually the follow-up to Rob Roy. It was written by the same guy, Walter Scott, and Rob Roy came out in 1817 and Wilfred of Ivanhoe came out in around about 1819, so it was the direct sequel to Rob Roy. And the story's set in actually 1194 according to that book, but in this game it's 1149, so they've just swapped the numbers around, and the same guy is present in the book, Wilfred of Ivanhoe, and his father Cedric of Rotherwood. It's a completely made up story, and apparently Robin of Locksley was there, as well as Prince John's advisors, and Geoffrey Longsword is made up, perhaps using the inspiration of William Longsword, and Volfric the Wild is again a completely made up name. But in that story, Wilfred of Ivanhoe, we also found Rebecca and also Rowena and several other maids which have made themselves available into this game. And in some editions of this game you'll also find Edmund the Grim and Brian de Bois and other characters from Wilfred of Ivanhoe. You may have noticed Robin of Locksley will only appear and help us if we've captured that domain, and if we visit that realm and that castle, and you can see that castle hasn't been taken so far. Nottingham Castle is still there, so until we take Nottingham we can't get the help of Robin Hood, and I'm not really bothered about that territory because it's the smallest territory in the kingdom at this moment, so it's sometimes worth going for Robin Hood to take the sieging to the bigger castles, and you can employ Robin Hood up to 3 times in the game, and then after 3 times he'll say, well, that's it, you've employed me once too many, that's it. So let's try to raid the castle, and yet again I'm raiding the weakest castle in the game, so I don't really know how much cash I'm hoping to get at the end of this endeavour, and surely the bigger raids to the bigger territories are definitely going to be worth it, and the weak raids on the weakest territories are not going to be worth it. And hopefully, well, I'm not going to beat the game on this playthrough, we're going to come second, so hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. This being 1194, it's set a year later than the Robin Hood game that we saw, Conquest of Longbow, and so that's why this game appears next on the list. of the games that we're covering in the Medieval Banquet series. Hopefully now, let's see what I decide to do. I'm still seeking conquest. Let's return home now, and hopefully let's get on to the second part of the game, which is demolishing those castles, which is what I should have done. As soon as you get 30 gold, you can get a catapult on board and you can start raiding. So the catapults are vital in this game. The knights aren't so important. And 20 for a castle, I'm not quite sure what that is, but maybe that's upgrading your home castle, and that's a lot of money to afford. And yet again, we've sailed straight on by the catapults, which means we're in an ever-defeating circle now, trying to catch up to the enemy, and trying to get as many soldiers together as the enemy obviously have, in order to knock out the biggest enemy. And that's not something that I'll manage to do, because of course, as soon as the biggest enemy attacks somebody else, then they'll get their money and they'll get their land and they'll become even bigger. And so the biggest enemy in this case happens to be the lighter red colour, which we're going to call the Angles, and the South Britons is not too bad to fight because they don't really have a huge army at this point. And so definitely pick your attackers. And they've kidnapped, besieged another lady, and I don't think we can have two wives, so at this point I'm going to select no to that. And I'm not really a master of this game, I haven't played it for many years, so this is me just wading in there and trying to swim at the deep end of the game. And yet again, by this stage the whole army has got twice as many forces as we have. I'm not quite sure how they managed to do that, but certainly raiding at this point, if we raid that castle, surely it will get lots and lots of money. But it doesn't really matter because they've put all the money into the defence forces at this point, so even if we capture the money from their castle, it doesn't mean that we can get much further. So finally we get two catapults together, and we're going to do what we should have done originally 20 turns ago. We're going to go for that northern castle and knock it out. And we can't face the red castle, so what we're going to do is to go south after this and capture the deep red castle, and then that's as far as we're going to get with it. At complete random, we'll lose all our income, which never seems to happen to the enemy, but can happen to us, and that's very worrying whenever that happens. And we still have those catapults, so let's carry on with plan A and take on the enemies to the north, where we'll then get another immaculate picture and some more colour cycling effects of a different castle. And now we move on to the third sub-game, which is taking down the enemy walls. You can see a huge storm going on whilst we're doing this as well. So the art of this game is to find the very pixel that we need to take down the very top of the battlements, and then move one pixel higher up every single time, and that will slowly work its way down through to the bottom of the side of that wall. And if you move 2 pixels by mistake, then you'll completely miss the wall and you'll score nothing at all. With our final boulder, let's see if we can do it, and yes, we've managed to do it. That means their defensive skill will be 0, and I think their defensive skill goes down maybe by 20% for every boulder that we hit on target. And look at that, the enemies weren't even in the castle, so that was a complete waste of time. And now we have almost more land than anybody else, but unfortunately this is the best I'm going to do at this particular game, And so if you capture the top castle early, then go for the middle castle and then go to the east castle. That's usually the way to get through everything before the east castle gets enough soldiers, and then it's just a small matter of taking care of the southwest castle and the one in the middle, and that's no problem at all. Let's see what we decide to do, and we're still building the army up at this point, and it looks like our catapults have disappeared. Maybe we can only have one set of catapults going on at any given point, and no, it's because there are labouring away in our campaign army, which is massive at this point, and still not a patch on the red enemy. So it does mean by the time you get to this stage in the campaign, you can take out virtually any castle that you like. It's just that you'll have to avoid the campaign army of the biggest enemy, which is going to be a problem. Roger Falconbridge's army is in that area and they've basically got nothing. So let's use all of our skills now and try to knock down some more territories. We'll get another picture of another castle and those disappear fairly quickly. And I'm playing this on an NTSC setup so we can get those as they were intended, as they were drawn by the artist. And that means that they have a faint black border around everything, the NTSC border, and that's apparently authentic to the American NTSC display. And look at that immaculate picture, every single leaf and blade of grass, and even moving water as well, and you half expect fish to jump out of there and birds to fly around in the sky, flags to wave and that kind of thing, but we do get some animation and it does take us back to that period. And they're not wearing full suits of armour, they're wearing normal helmets and also of course the chain mail. A bit of backstory with the game: it was created in America, but for whatever reason their original programmer didn't finish the job, so instead they recruited R.J. Michael, Mr. Intuition himself, who also created the animation library on the Amiga, which I'm not sure actually got used, but he created Intuition, the glue which holds together the entire system, and so he came on board and his name is not in the game credits, along with any other programmer. They've managed to credit all the animators and things like that, and the presentation and the artists, but they didn't credit any programmers. But this is his first, probably only game on the Amiga, so R.J. Michael has a small legacy on the computer, and of course after this he went to work on the Lynx, which were set up by Epix and then got sold to Atari. And now we get even more great graphics which were ported faithfully onto other machines, and the C64 version, and Defender of the Crown 2, which is an expanded version, and the PC version. And so we go to Ashby de la Zouk, which again is from the Wilfred of Ivanhoe book. In fact, it starts with the tournament of Ashby de la Zouk, and there it was made famous in the Disney Robin Hood cartoon as the famous tournament that goes on, which is attended by Robin of Locksley and Prince John and his assistants.
Double the taxes, triple the taxes.
I'm not sure if Prince John was there in the book, but they are in the Disney film, and so this game actually compares more to the Disney film than anything else. And if we hit this thing right in the middle of the shield, then we'll knock off our opponent. But we didn't hit it right in the middle of the shield, it raised up over his shield, and that means we got knocked off. And if you know how to play that minigame, it's fairly straightforward, but if you can't, then, well, you'll have to put that mouse pointer in exactly the right place every time to knock off your opponents, and that means we get some free land, and maybe some esteem as well, and that's definitely where we can gain some leadership. So maybe the closest that we ever got to a Disney conversion of Robin Hood was maybe this game, and it's a valiant attempt with some tremendous graphics and some periodic music and very few sound effects. But what we do have is great, and it was in many shop windows on demo mode and definitely on a track mode. But when I saw this in a computer shop window, I simply got a copy of the C64 version and said there's nothing the Amiga can do that the 64 can't do, and I used this very game as an excuse not to buy an Amiga. And I saw The Spy Who Loved Me had a great 64 version and other games like that, and I realised that Robocop and Batman and everything else was just as good on the 64. And then I saw Batman the movie on the Amiga and I realised that I was wrong. So this very game took me away from the Amiga for an entire year, and then in 1992 I managed to get myself an Amiga when I realised the folly of my mistake. I think this game is quite good, and it doesn't have as many options as the games that we've covered so far. You can't build up much of an economy, you can't dig and mine the landscape, you can't assign forces to different parts of the landscape that I have found, even though that's in the manual. So maybe you can do that and leave garrisons around, and that certainly would make the game a lot easier. No, this does have some arcade sections. It is a bit thin on the ground, but when you consider this was released in 1986, and in 1986 ZX Spectrum scene was at its height, using all of those wonderful 16 colour graphics, and the Commodore 64 scene was just starting. It got to its height in about 88 with all those wonderful games on the 64. Nobody had really seen games like this, and because the Amiga cost maybe over $1,000, nobody could afford to see it either. This was definitely one of those shop window kind of games which lured people to the Amiga, and of course FA Interceptor came out not long after this as well, which demonstrated the power of the machine, and for the first time we really got to see 16-bit graphics, which was again ported over to the Atari ST, and so the Atari ST doesn't quite have as good graphics or as good sound, but it's more or less the same game. So whilst you see my futile attempt at trying to get further with this game, it's definitely one of those where if you beat it early you can beat the rest, and if you get defeated early then you're going to be defeated over the rest. And if I take out the enemy's army, I think that's game over, and so all we can do is take over more of the enemy's land, and every time we do that the enemy will simply take the land from behind us. And again we're trying to get hundreds of troops together to face the enemy, and you can bet that the enemy has 300 troops by now, so that's not going to work. So all we can do is pile them through to those scores. And the huge surprise, I'm sure to everybody concerned, that the lowest score came from Amiga Joker, who managed to fork out 72% for this immaculate game, which came out in 1986 before people had even heard of 16-bit graphics, and when the IBM PC had CGA. So 72% from Amiga Joker, the One gave it 80%, the Amiga gave it 82%, and an award, Zap gave it a Sizzler award. The current Lemon Amiga score combined is 82%, and Acar gave this the highest score with 96%, which means on average it's around about 8.4, 8.5 out of 10. There's nothing wrong with the music, there's nothing wrong with the gameplay, there's nothing wrong with the graphics, and even though this was a bit thin on the ground, it was certainly a step up from Mule and other games that we managed to get on 8-bit platforms, and there were no great real-time stimulator. games in this stage of history, and even this one is more or less a board game where we take our turn and all that's missing is a rolling of that dice. But we get to take our turns against the army of the enemy, and then whatever happens after that is our outcome. So we've managed to put 2 catapults into the home army, and I'm not sure what they do. Apparently on some versions we can use the attack of the catapults when we are attacking enemies to bombard them, and there's a bombard option, but again I haven't seen that on the Amiga. Maybe that's in Defender of the Crown too. And so catapults aren't really much good unless you want to take down a castle, and I'm struggling at the moment to manage to even do anything. I'm floundering around on the map, realising that this is going to be game over pretty quickly. Jim Sachs moved on to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which was another game that was meant to come out, and the game recreated loads of immaculate artwork for it, but unfortunately the coders couldn't get it together enough, and so that game never came out, and that was a bit of a waste of time. So Jim Sachs has a legacy on the Amiga, and he also likes to watch these videos where people comment about this game. And so the last battle, unfortunately, even though I fought bravely, I lost the battle, and so we take a back route out of the castle, we sneak out to Robin's place in Sherwood, and we vow that one day we'll keep fighting until a Saxon rules the land. Thank you for viewing this Playguide and review, and we'll see you again in another one sometime soon. Thank you.